It seems like this appreciation of what is bittersweet is a universal human quality, and yet some of us have a what you call bittersweet
Mhm.
disposition. Do you have a sense of like this amount of people in the population have a bittersweet disposition? Is it like that? Is it not like that?
I don't know the exact amount who has the disposition. We developed a test that you can take to kind of measure where you are um, on this bittersweet scale. And in a minute, I can tell you some of the questions if you want, so people listening can get a sense of where they might fall on it. What we found is that people who score high on this scale tend to there's a strong correlation with people who also score high on the scale of high sensitivity.
Hello, friends. Welcome. Welcome to Sounds True One and Insights at the Edge Live. My name's Tami Simon. I'm the founder of Sounds True, and it's a great joy and honor to welcome Susan Cain. Many of you have probably heard of Susan as the author of the book Quiet, a book that really welcomed introverts and their power and gifts into our culture. It's a book that spent 7 years on the New York Times bestseller list, and Susan's TED Talk on introversion has been watched more than 40 million times. She's now written a new book. It's called Bittersweet. The subtitle is How Sorrow and Longing Make Us Whole. And it's my great joy now to welcome Susan Cain. We're going to be talking about her new book, Bittersweet, here to Insights at the Edge live on Sounds True One. Susan, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tammy. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you for having me.
You have so many great gifts. I mean, you're a beautiful writer, but I just want to underscore two additional gifts that really move me, impact me personally. One is that you have some kind of sniffer, my language, some kind of instinct or intuition for what has been left in the shadows in our culture that needs to be reclaimed and elevated. And I want to thank you for that because I think it's great work, great cultural evolution work. But then a second gift too, which is to take something that could be considered kind of narrow or niche and without diluting it, bring the topic to so many people. And that's a tremendous talent. So I just want to start off, Susan, by acknowledging you and
Oh
thanking you.
gosh. Well, thank you so much for putting it that way. I guess it's partly like I think for any writer, you don't want to write about what everybody is talking about already. I always think that the purpose of writing books and of reading books really is to encounter the deep truths that people don't feel comfortable chatting about at the grocery store or with their coworkers until they've been given permission to do it. Like that's what a book can do, and that's why I love them.
Well, that's certainly what your work does. So thank you. The topic of sorrow and longing and how sorrow and longing can make us whole. That's not necessarily what you would start a conversation with at the grocery store. So tell us, how did you identify bittersweet, how sorrow and longing make us whole as the topic you wanted to tackle?
Well, I mean, it's really like what happened to me again and again and again throughout my life, was that I would have these experiences, especially when I was listening to sad music. Um, well, I had one that I write about in the book where I was a law school student. I was hanging out in my dorm, and some friends were coming to my dorm room to pick me up to go to class. And when they got there, they found me, as I often was, like, blasting on my stereo speakers, like Leonard Cohen or somebody like that. Because I love all kinds of music, but I've always been drawn to this kind of deep, yearning music. And my friends thought that was funny. And like we're sort of joking around about why was I listening to this funeral music. And at the time it just kind of seemed funny and I laughed and we went to class. But I really couldn't stop thinking about this for decades after. Um, Number one, about what is it in our culture that makes it seem so funny to listen to that kind of music aloud, let's say. But also, what it- what was the music? What is the music saying? Like, why do so many of us love, whether it's Leonard Cohen or Nina Simone or Adele? Like what is that kind of music saying to us? And what I realized is there is a deep bittersweet tradition that has existed for centuries all across the world. You see it in all the different wisdom traditions that tells us that there is this place where joy and sorrow meet. That is the truth of being human. And it's not that we love sorrow. None of us love it. None of us want it. But there's something about acknowledging the joy and the sorrow together that connects us with all the other humans who experience life this way. And that is also a kind of route to creativity and even to transcendence. And this is what we feel when we hear that music. It's like a hint of transcendence that exists. Music is a very easy way to identify it, but you quickly start to realize that it's not only there, it's everywhere.
When you say a bittersweet
Mhm.
tradition, who would you say historically are some of the figures? We all know this person was a writer or musician in that tradition.
Oh gosh, I mean, there have been so many. There's one that has become a kind of like, you know, guide for me, which is the 12th century Sufi poet Jalal al-Din Rumi. Many people, he's become a best-selling poet in the United States, so many people know Rumi, but I'm not sure they're focused on that aspect of Rumi's teachings. Uh, and
Hmm.
one of the hearts of what he taught and what he wrote about over and over was the idea that longing, I mean, he spoke of it in terms of longing for the divine. I think it speaks to us whether we are overtly uh, religious or secular. It doesn't matter. The teaching is that the longing for that which is most true and good and beautiful and divine, that there's something about the longing itself, the sorrow for its absence, that paradoxically brings you closer to that for which you seek. Um, so he says the longing itself is the return message that we're looking for.
And it seems like this appreciation of what is bittersweet is a universal human quality, and yet some of us have a what you call bittersweet
Mhm.
disposition. Do you have a sense of like this amount of people in the population have a bittersweet disposition? Is it like that? Is it not like that?
I don't know the exact amount who has the disposition. What we were able to do was we developed a test that you can take to kind of measure where you are um, on this bittersweet scale. And in a minute, I can tell you some of the questions if you want, so people listening can get a sense of where they might fall on it. But what we found is that people who score high on this scale tend to there's a strong correlation with people who also score high on the scale of high sensitivity, which is the construct that was identified by the psychologist Elaine Aron to describe people who just kind of react really intensely to everything in the world, the good and the bad. You feel the beauty of the sunsets more intensely. You hear the grinding noise of the construction site more intensely. So these are sensitive people, and that tends to go along with bittersweetness. But and that's about 20% of the population. But then there's also a lot of people who come to this more bittersweet way of being just through traveling through life and experiencing, the joys and the sorrows alike all the time. um it starts to kind of open our eyes to what I would describe as the nature of human reality.
hmm Now, this notion of happy, sad, let's just say for the sake of this conversation, being one word for a moment, like we don't get that much. Is there a word in our language that says that, happy, sad at the same time? Or is that what you're saying, bittersweet is that word?
Bittersweet is the word that I found in our language that best describes it. I don't know that we have a word that works better than that. um and an interesting sort of byproduct of the absence of that word is if you look at positive psychology, the field of positive psychology over the last 20, 30 years, I mean, the field developed, well, I'll take a step back. Psychology in general,
Sure.
like psychology became mainstream, let's say in the era of Freud, at a time when it was all about the negative. It was all about the illnesses that a human mind could withstand, and what could we do about those illnesses and those problems and those neuroses and so on. Then along comes positive psychology 30 or 40 years ago, and it says, oh, we've been focusing too much on the negative, um, and we should be thinking about what makes a human being thrive, what makes us flourish. And so the field of positive psychology for a while was all about optimism, cheerfulness, gratitude, all these things, everything positive. And it was almost like unseemly to talk about the negative within the field. Now we're suddenly at this moment that some people are calling positive psychology 2.0, that is being led by people like Tim Lomas, if I'm saying his name right, Scott Barry Kaufman, Paul Wong, and others, who are saying, no, there's always been this kind of dialectic. There's always been a kind of push-pull between that which brings us joy and that which brings us sorrow, and we need them both. This is who human beings are, and we're coming to this recognition. But to come back to the question you answered, I don't know that we've had great language for this, and that makes it hard to talk about.
Mhm. Well, I also want to just have a moment of thank goodness we're moving into positive psychology 2.0. I noticed, and I'm sure a lot of other people with a high bittersweet uh, disposition noticed, this sort of pressure in our culture to be positive in a way that I'll say for me felt
Mhm,
inauthentic. And, even, I mean, I got feedback from some of my early video interviews that I should smile
mhm.
more. And I was like, well, how do I smile when I don't feel like smiling? Well, just smile
Yeah.
more. And I'm like, no, screw you. Like, forget that. Like, I'll smile when I feel a natural smile, but there's so much pressure. And it seems like that is a phenomenon in our contemporary Western culture, specifically North American culture. And I wonder if you can speak some about that. Is it culturally
It
specific?
definitely is culturally specific, and psychologists have even studied, they've compared cultures to track how much do people smile, and also what is the meaning that people make in a smile. So there are many cultures where people regard excessive smiling as a sign of either foolishness, like clearly you're not getting what's going on, or you wouldn't be smiling all the time. It's like that feeling, or as a sign of insincerity. Again, nothing could be making you that happy all the time, so you must not be telling the truth. So there are cultures for sure that have that disposition. Um, and in American culture, what happened is that during the 19th century, as we became more focused on how to become kind of like a business success out in the world, it became really important to distinguish ourselves as winners and not as losers. And so people wanted to take on the attributes of somebody who was going to become a winner, and that meant not taking on the emotional attributes that had anything to do with loss. So the psychologist William James writes about this, how in the 19th century it started to become like out of fashion for people even to comment on bad weather outside. Like you shouldn't say it's cloudy or it's rainy, because that was focusing too much on the negative. And we're still really living
Hmm.
with that heritage.
Hmm. So, just one more kind of clarification about this notion of positive psychology 2.0.
Mhm,
How do you see that kind of paradoxical balance, if you will? Like, people do want their business leaders or leaders of all kinds to be
yeah.
visionary, to have a sense of the possible, and we can do this, like that's a good
Mhm.
thing, and yet to embrace our sorrow simultaneously. How do you understand that in its paradoxical nature?
Well, I actually believe that this way of being is incredibly linked with creativity. Um, eh, and well, wow, we could do this, we could do this, here's what we could reach for. Precisely because there's something in the noticing of the gap between what is and what could be, or what is and what we wish were. There's something in that gap that stimulates us creatively. And you can see this in many of the different studies of creativity. But even if you look at like the word longing itself, we think of that as being, uh, you know, you'd be mired in longing, that longing is a negative state, a kind of quicksand, an emotional quicksand. But the etymology of the word literally means to grow longer and to reach for. So it is very possible to be a visionary leader who is reaching for the stars, and other people want to follow that person, precisely because that person is noticing what is missing.